Hi, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion webinar on the current state of traceability. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items I would like to go over. First is the AIM North America Antitrust and Collaboration and Work Product Policy. It is the policy of AIM North America to conduct its operations in strict compliance with the antitrust laws. No AIM North America activity shall create even the appearance of a violation of the letter or spirit of the antitrust laws. AIM North America committee meetings or webinars like today are held for the primary purpose of advancements in our industry, which necessarily involves development of work product intended solely for the public domain. AIM's developed this policy for the protection of its members who engage in this important collaborative effort. A little bit about AIM North America before the panel starts. AIM North America is the premier alliance for the automated data capture technologies industry. For more than 20 years, AIM North America has championed the growth and acceptance of these technologies and applications through education, standards, community, and advocacy. AIM North America supports consensus-based standards, promotes community, advocates, and educates. AIM champions concerns and solutions to industries and governments to break down market barriers and constraints. AIM North America has the recognition to be taken seriously and to help you be successful in the marketplace. So let's get into the panel. I will have Amy Awe, Market Development Manager for Avery Dennison, go over today's session and kick things off. Amy, take it away.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. So just to give an overview of the food industry and what kind of makes it different from some of the other, from other industries. Well, in 2021, the global food market generated over $8 trillion in US dollars in just revenue alone. And 1.8 trillion of those dollars made up just the US food service and retailing supply chains. And today, even coming out of a pandemic, there are over 1 million restaurants operating today in the US. But the food industry is very complex. It is not vertically integrated, unlike other industries. And it's very just disjointed as far as how far your food travels and all the possible places along the supply chain, how it's connected to get to your plate. I think consumers sometimes have an idea that your food is grown, farmer delivers it maybe to a distribution center or the grocer, and then you take it home. But there's a lot of steps in between there with processors and wholesalers and distribution and many different steps. In fact, the average distance that your food travels every day to get to your plate is 1,500 miles. So there's been a lot of food industry disruption with that. First of all, the first one I would say is omnichannel. So I would refer to all the new delivery models, whether it be Uber Eats, or it could be meal kit delivery companies like a Blue Apron or Instacart, a lot of new models. And then some other disruption is food safety is a concern to everyone, especially the consumer. There were 270 food and beverage recalls in 2021 in the US. The third, I would say, is sourcing and consumers wanting to know where not only their food comes from, which is 46%, but 44% of consumers actually even want to understand a little bit better of where the actual ingredients are coming from and how it's being sourced. And the last is just the impact arising uncertainty right now with supply chains and shortages and just a lot of impact we're seeing in the food industry over the past several years. So there's certain technology drivers right now for these disruptions that I just listed. The first is technology geared towards speed and efficiency. It could be digital ordering, in food ending up in our landfills through the supply chain. So half of all vegetables, nearly half are thrown out, and half of all seafood is discarded globally. The third is labor shortage. Has been an ongoing, opportunity for the food supply chain and food service. 78% of restaurants say that in the US report that they don't even have enough staffing to operate their current consumer demand. And the last is food safety. Overall food, preventing recalls, making sure that we understand where food is located in the supply chain. 1 in 6 Americans fall ill every year due to food that's contaminated. That's 48 million people. So there's a lot of food industry initiatives right now and legislation trying to help with traceability and how it benefits the entire supply chain. So Lucy, to ask you, can you tell me a little bit more around food FSMA 204?
Of course, Amy. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I'm Director of Community Engagement for GS1 US on the retail grocery side. Go ahead, Thomas.
I'm Thomas Berg. I'm the Food Safety and Quality Assurance Traceability Manager at Chipotle Mexican Grill.
And I am Don Durham. I'm with PLM Fleet, and I'm the Vice President of Customer Solutions.
Awesome. So now let's go to the next slide. I'll talk to you a little bit about the new era of smarter food safety and the FSMA proposed 204 regulation, which is 2 very different things, and we're going to discuss that a little more. So next slide, please. All right, so many of us here today in this webinar have been looking to enhance traceability for many years because of what Amy mentioned, to expedite recalls, to be more preventive instead of reactive. So back in 2011, actually, President Barack Obama passed the Food Safety Modernization Act. It was signed into law. And ever since, FSMA has been aiming to ensure that we have a safer supply chain, mostly focusing on prevention instead of response. Now, many of you here as well know Frank Yanis, and he is Deputy Commissioner for Food Policy and Response. And he has been leading an effort to make FSMA a more continuous improvement process, right? And this is what is called the new era of smarter food safety. This is the FDA's blueprint for the next 10 years to be able to establish a food safety culture through new and emerging digital technology. So the 4, core pillars that you're seeing in this slide, they're the main focus of the new era of smarter food safety. And as you can see, it does, focus and really encourage tech-enabled traceability for outbreak responses, for foodborne illnesses, to prevent this. Also, it focuses on smarter tools and approaches for prevention, adapting to new business models and retail food safety modernization, and of course, establishing a food safety culture for all food companies. And of course, it just highlights how we all need to be part of this. It takes every single link in the supply chain for this to work. Next slide. Now, Section 204 of the FDA Food Safety Modernization Act is what we know FSMA 204 to be. And it's a section, like I said. So in September of 2020, the US FDA published this proposed rule that many companies read, made comments, asked questions since back then. And what it's aiming to do is laying the foundation for end-to-end food traceability in, of course, the food industry. So what it requires is that all the companies that manufacture, process, pack, or hold foods in a specific list I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about will be required to keep and share traceability records with the FDA within 24 hours. Now, this includes specific unique identification of products, locations, parties. It also includes a very specific list for high-risk foods, such as leafy greens, fruits, vegetables, nut butters, everything that has had a historical, track of having recalls or foodborne illness outbreaks. So what it does is it outlines specific key data elements that need to be part of specific critical tracking events, such as when the food is received, when it's grown, when it's shipped, etc. And these need to be recorded, shared as necessary, and then shared with the FDA within 24 hours of when they require this information. So the rule is going to be finalized in November of this year, and then it's expected to be effective in January of 2023. And companies have 2 years to implement their traceability programs to capture specific information, for example, like lot code of the product as it moves throughout the supply chain. And they're expected to comply by January of 2025. So we're all getting ready for this. We're all working together in, distributors, operators, retailers, food service operators. Everybody is actually looking and focusing on how to get this information throughout our supply chains.
And just to add to that, Lucy, like really kind of what we're seeing from the food industry, especially distinguishing between the Section 204, the proposed rule, and the new era smarter food safety, we see them as complementary, but like distinct methods of, going about a, smarter and safer food system. Yeah. So one thing, where FSMA 204 and the proposed rule is really in kind of that traditional set of administrative law of describing what industry actors, regulated industry actors, need to perform and what outcomes need to be met. So one of the challenges I think FDA had was, they couldn't prescribe specific technology. So where the new era smarter food safety is how do you fulfill those regulatory obligations, and also how do you fulfill the spirit of FSMA of having a more reactive or having a more proactive. And preventative, more preventative way of going about our business processes in food safety. And also with the new era smarter food safety, the FDA is working on how can we foster the direct technologies and the adjacent technologies and business processes to help fulfill that greater mission. And I think that's where there's a lot of excitement in the industry about that approach of meeting industry where they're at, and also like being cognizant of the speed of innovation that's happening in the space right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Thomas, I'll just go ahead and add to that also. So to be very clear, these are proposed rules are not the law yet. I just want to make sure everybody's grounded on that, and I think every speaker has said that. But there's been some discussion in the industry. I go to a lot of trade associations. They're like, "Oh, this is not going to come about. They're going to have delays." I was actually at the Food Safety Summit a couple of weeks ago, and up in Chicago, and Frank Giannis was one of the keynote speakers, and he really had that discussion that says, this rule's coming about, that we will open this up on November. They're actually mandated by law to come up with it by November of 2022 of this year. Once it'll be then just filed in the Federal Registry. No fanfare, just filed in the Federal Registry. 60 days after that, it becomes law of the land. And like Lucy said, it takes about 2 years before FDA will probably actually start to enforce these rules. I would also advocate that, many of us heard the words FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act. The 204 rule is really FDA's really first attempt to modernize the food supply chain. FSMA really should have been called the Food Documentation Act. They wanted you to document what you were doing in that supply chain. So what's different about this is that operators or retail establishments are now going to have records retention requirements. And, we don't know how exactly they're going to look like, but as the proposed rule goes, that tomato that was consumed at a retail establishment, and that is a restaurant, is the way FDA is defining that, or a grocery store, will have to keep those records of where that was for 2 years. Many of you may not know this, but Frank Yanis, that Lucy mentioned, the Deputy Commissioner of Food Policy, he actually has a podcast, and you can go onto the FDA website and listen to the podcast. And he actually talks about giving food a voice throughout the supply chain. And so we've got to really look at that. And the other thing I would say is that I'm in that fleet world, and I'm in the cost world for food distributors. And so one of the things is that FDA did their own financial impact study. And they said that it was first year cost to implement this rule is $1.5 billion. I talked to trade associations, and they think it could be double that. And of course, this is in 2018 dollars. So, that's just some ads that I have on the 204 rule.
Thank you, Don and Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. So Don, what have you seen that are drivers to enable traceability and the standards adoption within the food industry?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, you can't really address anything these days without talking about the pandemic. So, what happened to us during that period of time? What happened to supply chain? Supply chain is a very delicate thing. Amy, you talked a little bit about that in the beginning of your opening remarks, and that, it's a one up, one back. Where did I get it to? Where did I get this from, and where did I send it to? None of the ERP systems are connected. We all don't belong to ecosystems. There's lots of different brokers and trucking companies that bring our food across the country when you're traveling 1,500 miles. And so if you think about it, in 2019, there was a study done by the NRA. That's not the National Rifle Association. That's the National Restaurant Association. And what they did was they looked at, where consumers were spending their dollars. 51% of the dollars spent in this country all through 2019 was done in restaurants. The other 49% were done in through a grocery. In this country, we consume food two ways. You go to a restaurant, or you eat at home. And so if you think about it, it's just a matter of a couple of weeks. We were all sheltering in place in March. And, let's face it, the restaurants completely shut down. That whole channel shut down completely. So all of our food was being consumed from grocery stores. So I can tell you that these are two distinct channels that food flows through. The equipment is different. The packaging is different. You take a restaurant, might get a 10-pound bag of frozen French fries. At home, we get maybe a 1 pound or a 3 pound. And so they don't really commingle. They can't cross over. And so that was some of our challenge. Even today, there is some product sitting in some cold storage warehouses somewhere that were meant for restaurants that are still sitting there today. And so, those two distinct challenges really caused what we thought were gaps in our or shortages. And we never really had a food shortage. In fact, during the pandemic, I was asked for 400 refrigerated trailers to sit in the Ohio Basin because they were processing, harvesting protein, and they had nowhere to put it. All the cold storage facilities were filled up, and so that as you can realize, I'm a guy that looks at the finance part of this. So pushing food down the supply chain is less than 2% business. There's not a lot of money in it. So there's some real challenges, with one up, one back, where'd you get it to, where you're sending it to, does cause some challenges of where your food is at. So getting that visibility to build that resilient supply chain. I look at operational opportunities when we look at technologies and how that can be paid for. So food distributors, only 6.5% actually take an inventory. 48% say they never take inventory. They just do a paper reconciliation. I know I paid for something. I know this amount went out the door. And so there's some challenges with that. Amy mentioned recalls earlier in her opening remarks. The average recall is $10 million. So if you look at that, so how many food recalls are we having a year? We're averaging probably around 300. It's plus or minus a little bit. But that's $3 billion a year based on that. So there's opportunities there. That's just the hard cost. If you look at soft cost, you're really looking at something like, Pew did a study and said, for products under recall, 55% of consumers will not buy your product. 15% say they'll never come back again. What are some other opportunities we could be looking at is labor. 43% turnover in food distribution facilities. That's every year. 36% of drivers. How can technology play a part in helping increase those, making jobs easier, maybe hiring less skilled labor, but increasing your accuracy? But if you look at over-road trucking, that could be more than 100%. So the large trucking companies that move from point A to point B in there. So I think automating and validating using technology will really help us out in this particular space because there are lots of opportunities.
Definitely, Don. And I also think, as you mentioned, we have to mention the pandemic, right? But even now, we're understanding and realizing all these problems were like under a magnifying glass, right? We were able to really hone into the problems, and just the acceleration that's happening, right, after the pandemic. Just how fast companies are trying to adapt and innovate is just really impressive.
And one other thing I'll note also is on the standardization piece, we're finding that as we're trying to implement more automation measures, the ability to have interoperable data is core to those expected outcomes. And interoperability is important, definitely for externally linked records, especially in traceability, but it also can benefit, internal interoperability as well between between disparate data systems within your operation. So as we're looking at implementing automation measures, you're really leveraging those identifiers in multiple ways. And that can really intersect in interesting ways, not just with, what we kind of traditionally think in automation, such as like robotics, but also in like business process replication as well, in a robotic fashion. Maybe it's not actually, mechanically doing something, but it may be replicating what was previously a manual task. So we're finding standards are enabling so many opportunities there to meet the challenges that we're seeing, that have been spurred by the pandemic.
Yeah, and probably the only thing else I'd really have to add to that is, as companies look for different automation solutions for traceability, I don't think the quest is to, eliminate any or reduce labor, but really it's just preserve the labor they have and make it more efficient so that as they implement traceability technologies and just business practices, what are ways that we can alleviate from redundancies and time suck tasks that allow the employees to spend more time servicing customers. And I think there's also a real need to with enabling traceability is again around all these different threats of new entrants. Everybody's delivering food, right? You can get groceries from just about any retailer. It seems like online, and the meal kit companies, and you can get food delivered to your house, your doorstep, a lot of different ways. So a real need for enabling some traceability processes. So Lucy, what are some of the advantages that supply chain partners, besides just complying with like regulatory compliance, have if they're going to adopting GS1 standards for different traceability programs?
Yes, thank you, Amy. Well, Thomas was stealing my thunder, by the way. He was already talking about interoperability, which is awesome because that's what we want. This is an industry led initiative, GS1 standards adoption. And really what we're looking for is that, we hear the word digitization. Did I say that right? I'm Colombian, so you guys know that. But anyway, with, IoT devices, with RFID, with all of this data that's coming at us, what do we need to do in order to ingest, interpret, and share this information so my partners understand it the same way we do, right? Because one thing I like to kind of explain it is if I was speaking Spanish to you right now, you would all be like, right? I mean, it would be easy for me speaking Spanish, but you would not understand what I'm saying, which is what a lot of our businesses tend to do. Oh, I have my own identifier and you have to do your mapping to make sure that you understand what I'm telling you. Well, this is what interoperability is all about. And the standards open that door to a common language that we can all use regardless of the technology or regardless of the system we're using, to make sure that we can connect, that we can understand and interpret the data the same way. And that is the real value, right? So things, for example, not just meeting regulatory compliance, but of course, we're very passionate about recall response times. We want to make sure we can respond, because every minute that goes by, the risk, right? If there's a food safety risk out there, grows exponentially. So we also know that cost will be reduced because we wouldn't have to contact as many locations depending on the product, right? But also we wouldn't have to throw away food that is actually good, which we end up doing sometimes with these recalls. Also, inventory management accuracy. I mean, with GS1 standards and using that same data that we capture for traceability, like the GTIN, the date, the lot code, this can lead to better stock rotation throughout the supply chain, reduce mispicks, out of stocks, make sure we have faster fulfillment, on-shelf availability, making sure we can reduce this waste that Don was talking about at the beginning, and ensuring the best and freshest product is out there for our customers. The other part is, we're talking about the pandemic, but we also understand how all of this end-to-end supply chain visibility helps our companies be more resilient, right? And this is in any crisis. Understanding where's your product, how much of it you have, what are the expiration dates. Imagine what you can do with your contingency plans, right? If there's a weather-related incident, or trucks break down, etc. There's so many things that could be done, understanding and having that visibility. Also, improved supply and demand planning, improved quality assurance processes. You'll be able to tie a product, even at the end, if there's complaints about this product, to where it was manufactured or where it went through in the supply chain. And as you can tell, I can talk about this all, the next 2 hours, but I can't. So there's so many benefits that we can gain from just our traceability programs, leveraging the standards, and making sure that we can also leverage technology.
Yeah, I don't know if there's much that I can add to that, Lucy. I think you very robustly answered what advantages I can bring. And the only other thing I would add is that the participation in the standardization process can reap a lot of benefits as well. To have kind of a shameless plug, we participate in the 204 work group at GS1, and it, being able to foster that perspective across the supply chain, especially in these cooperative processes, is really reaps additional benefits. So it can help, incubate, technology in, the technology industry. It can help have internal alignment and external alignment. Really, standardization is really the unlocker to having this end-to-end traceability capability that we need actually for all these use cases that we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Thomas. So one thing we haven't really talked about too much so far is sustainability. So sustainability is a really big topic in the food industry, and so is reducing waste. So Dom, what would you say, what are some of the food waste concerns and maybe ways that we can address that with having improved visibility?
Yeah, I will say that we have a lot of today's consumers are value eaters now. They eat with their values. So they want to know more and more information about their food. We can see this in the restaurants and in the grocery stores, where they're trying to give us more and more information, because that's what consumers are demanding. I do a lot in this space. We talk about on the fleet side of my business. We actually have a all electric or zero emission refrigerated trailer. It's kind of a Tesla. It just runs off of batteries. And so companies are adopting these technologies, but also regulators are requiring it. So you go to the state of California, and you're required to have hybrid units. In other words, they run off of diesel while they're running down the road, but you can plug them in. So sustainability is becoming more and more relevant within businesses. We all know that in the past years, just about every company's got a CTO, Chief Technology Officer. And today, everybody's got a sustainability officer somewhere in their company also. So those are becoming more and more prevalent in doing that. But the fact is that, USDA reports that somewhere between 30 and 40% of our food is actually wasted. Post-harvest to the consumer itself is being thrown away. If you take all of the rotting food in the world and you made it a nation, it would be the third largest carbon producing nation in the world. So you'd have China number one, you have the US number two, and rotting food would be number three. So this is a real challenge for the world as to how can we do that. And I just told you that it's a 2% business pushing food down the supply chain. And if we can save half of that, 2/3 of that, I mean, that's available for eating. And then all the resources it takes to grow something and to transport it those 1,500 miles again. We go back to you, Amy, to transport it to your home. So I'm starting to see a couple of initiatives by government to taking a look at this. So one of those is EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. I actually had a meeting with them a couple of weeks ago, really looking at this initiative. So they have a 2030 food waste initiative to reduce food waste by 50%. There'll be some corporates that have signed up for those to say that we're going to commit to reduce our food waste in our supply chain or in our facilities by 50% by the year 2030 is what they're looking at. We also always must keep in mind whenever government starts to look at these things and get people to participate in initiatives, at some point they might look at regulating these initiatives. And so, what they're really looking at is, how can I look at food from dirt to dump, basically, how can we track this? And so it's going to be important, going back to what Thomas and Lucy were talking about is, they talk about standardization, all those things. We're really talking about a common language. How can we all speak and communicate with one another? Different systems don't talk to one another. And, when I go to a facility, I might see 4 different barcodes on that same case because they mean different to different companies and what they need. So I think that, really looking at, sustainability is not just a marketing thing anymore. It is really embedded in our culture these days, and people are really looking forward to that, both consumers, both industry, and also government.
Thanks, Don. That was great. So I would add from a business perspective, really being able to manage expiry, particularly I see that sometimes in food service or where prepared meals are being made, to be able to manage expiry and also identification, product recalls, because my experience has been sometimes out of an abundance of caution, like if there's a recall or food withdrawal or investigation, they're kind of blanketing, the industry might have blanket, a recall or, abundance of caution, pull that food back. So being able to put that traceability standards into the supply chain will really help maybe more surgically remove products and identify really what needs to be removed, thus saving potentially a lot of food from being wasted and prevention of servicing the customers as well. So some POCs that we'd recently done, we've been able, just by digitizing a traceability system, has been able to reduce food waste by 20%. So when you add in, inventory visibility and recall, I mean that it can, the savings can certainly grow too. So to kind of get into kind of watch outs or advice, Thomas, what advice would you have to food industry peers about what to do and what not to do if they're going to start beginning a traceability program?
Thanks, Amy. So I think the most important thing to remember when you're implementing a traceability program is that it can touch a lot of different parts of your business. And it also, like, you're really starting with executive support when you're thinking about the traceability journey, and also making sure that it really aligns with your industry ethos and your industry goals and what you were trying to achieve with the traceability system. Through that, then you really can gain alignment on what outcomes that you are looking for, and then engaging the appropriate stakeholders. It kind of follow a model kind of similar to how you arrive at a HACCP plan in a food safety scenario, where you want to make sure that you have every stakeholder involved that has expertise in the area and domain that plays a role in the system in the system. So when you're thinking about traceability, obviously in the food industry, food safety is generally the chief use case, but you'll also need to have folks from supply chain, folks from operations, from IT, definitely. But you also may even have marketing involved. Like if you're using it as a way of reaching your consumer, or if maybe you have a customer, like a buyer that wants to have some sort of narrative based on traceability, that could also play a role in the implementation plan that you have. And then what you really want to do is, after generating those use cases derived from, why are you implementing the traceability system in the first place, and gathering what you actually need to do to like take your current state of your enterprise software and your enterprise practices and get to that end goal, then where can you utilize standardization internally and externally to facilitate that traceability system, and allowing you to be agile, like allowing you to be able to pick the technology pieces that work for your business. One of the things to kind of to watch out for is what can happen sometimes is you might get excited about a particular technology, and then you're going to try to fit that technology into your traceability system where it may not be the right tool for your needs. So there can kind of, and I think that's been something that has challenged the food traceability space in the past, is kind of the shiny object syndrome a little bit, where we see a particular technology and we think this is the panacea or the silver bullet that will enable end-to-end traceability, but it's really a coalition of technologies working together through standardization that really achieve what you are achieve those outcomes and use cases that you originally determined. And then one other thing to watch out for too is try not to do too many things at once when you are implementing a stage gating process of testing and evaluating, and making sure that it will work at scale is definitely a great approach in order to avoid pitfalls and to pivot as you are implementing.
There's one thing you forgot, Thomas, to add there, and it's, if you're going to show up to an IT meeting, which you need your IT resources, don't forget the chocolates. I mean, that's something you cannot do. I can say that because I was in IT in my past life, but no, actually, another thing that is really important to keep in mind is, don't attempt a traceability program without having a very solid master data foundation. And we can't emphasize this enough. I know Thomas touched on it, but just making sure you don't use the proprietary languages. You have a way to synchronize master data that is seamless, and not just calling someone up, hey, this product changed to this number now. And this is something that really will help you have quality data once you implement the system as the product moves along the supply chain. The chocolate thing is true too. Just saying.
I'll remember that, Lucy.
Star Trek references can get you a long way too.
IT people are important,
So I would add that, again, I look at the business drivers and the drivers that will help bring coalitions within the business themselves and stuff like that. The challenge we have today is we talk about getting back to normal in the distribution end of the business, and there really is no normal. So we're talking about what the new normal. There really isn't a new normal. It's going to be the next normal. This is going to constantly change for us. Flexibility within supply chain is going to have to be accounted for, and to be able to move our food through the supply chain. We've got geopolitical actions going on right now in Ukraine with Russia that's impacting we were just before, some of us might have heard us talking a little bit about the gas prices in our particular areas. And so this stuff is all going to impact, business. And so, understanding a traceability program, what the purpose is, why are you doing it? I think that you always have to ground yourself in the reasons why you're doing something. And I think one of those, things is going to be regulatory compliance, about how I can move my product through the supply chain to pick up all the critical tracking events and the key data elements as they go through supply chain. And what does that really mean for me? And how can I use that, that information to actually provide efficiencies within business? And I say that, again, I go back to, in operations, it's a 2% business, pushing food down the supply chain, and really understanding those opportunities on, if you understood where your food is at, even within the four walls of your facility, can bring financial benefits. And I just take it that, if we were, if we're looking at cost and stuff, $3 billion to implement FSMA 204 rules. And if we're able to reduce part of the waste in there, there's $1 billion right there to help supply chain. So really, it's looking at those key opportunities that you have in your business to help drive out this stuff. You know what? At the end of the day, this is the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, to know where your food is coming from, to be able to give food a voice in the supply chain.
Thanks, guys. The last thing I would also add. So one, I want to reiterate what Thomas said about making sure other stakeholders, anything that you implement certainly needs other stakeholders in the organization, because if it's only supply chain or ops or QA, you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities to understand what's needed to implement, the ROI, the benefits internally. And then I would say is not all supply chains are created equal. So as you look to put together a traceability system and what's going to be needed from those that service you or those you even service, there's different levels of knowledge about whether it be FSMA, traceability, data sharing, GS1 standards, and look to also, kind of extend that. I think that education or that, to the other supply chain actors, so they understand the expectations and understand how to do this and how it'll also benefit them as well. Because things you may implement in your own kind of four walls of where you're putting traceability should certainly also be able to have a benefit to them, and them understanding some of the ROI and the education behind that as well. Thank you.
With that, we can move to some of the questions that we received here, if everyone's ready. So the first question we received is, do companies have to share traceability info with FDA automatically or upon request from the FDA?
So if you want, I'll jump in that. It's upon request from FDA. Even under the Food Safety Modernization Act, it's always upon request. My personal experience is that FDA doesn't walk in arbitrarily and ask you for all of this data. It's like when they have a problem, unless they're doing an FDA inspection, they may ask you for certain data requirements. But if there's a challenge, if there's a problem in the supply chain, products under a food recall, that's when they're going to come in and say, hey, I need this information. Can you provide it to me?
And just to add to that, and I'll caveat that I don't think we know exactly how FDA is going to carry out the enforcement of 204, but from my understanding of especially in the participation of the stakeholder meetings going into the formulation of the proposed rule, there's going to be an opportunity, because there's this requirement to reproduce records within 24 hours on these, on the food traceability list. It may be used to help inform investigation practices when they're doing hypothesis seeking in, a traceback and, epidemiologic investigation. So sometimes it can be challenging because they'll kind of want to know what the counterfactual is, right? Like they'll kind of want to know what is happening in the supply chain that may, inform us on what that conversions point is. So it definitely will be also facilitate some of their investigation practices at least from the perspectives that I've seen so far.
And then talking about just some of the technologies around it, is RFID being used to provide the traceability requirement, and would temperature sensing tags be useful in accomplishing and providing data for traceability?
I can start to answer that question. You guys can chime in, but there's so many things, right, that we would like to capture as part of a traceability program. But at the same time, we have to weigh the cost, right, and how easy it would be to implement throughout. So there's many even before we were starting to address FSMA 204, there's a lot of documentation on best practice, right, that should be included on a data carrier. And the conversation from industry has led for it to be the G10, the data, and the lot, even though there is, the possibility of embedding a lot of other information into an RFID tag, into a 2D code. So it is possible as per requirements from trading partners, but the things we want to focus on are the main and critical things that are needed for all of these benefits, which would be the G10 data and lot. But yes, a lot of it can be, a lot more can be included. It's just not the basics.
Yeah, and I'll just add on that also is that currently under FSMA, there is a requirement to be able to provide, if it's requested upon delivery from your distributor, from the trucking company, if they're providing you the food at your dock, that you can ask for that temperature off of the refrigerated trailer. That temperature is being captured under a microprocessor on the trailer. I think it captures up to 2 years worth of data. Many of the units today have what we call telematics on them, and that telematics can actually capture that data, and then you can pull a timeline out. When you pull it directly from the unit itself, you get the 2 years worth of data all over. So there are some requirements right now under FSMA, under the sanitary transportation of food for human and animal consumption under that rule. And then there's some requirements under preventive controls inside of facilities that are required to capture data, or in the case of preventive controls, is if you have a excursion to the data that you normally get, that's what you actually have to document.
And Don, just to clarify, these are already existing rules. It's not part of FSMA 204.
Correct. These are not part of 204. These are under preventive controls and also under the Sanitary Transportation of Food Act is what those are.
And I'll just add a little bit more on like the novel, or on the usage of data carriers in conjunction with accomplishing FSMA 204, and it just puts ever more focus on the having success and the ability for us to capture that mission critical information at critical tracking events. So I think that it doesn't change necessarily everything, but it does change our focus to an extent on, when we're evaluating effectiveness and when we're evaluating how data carriers are used in, operational processes, like what can we do to improve so that we can have that information available in as readily accessible of a format as possible. To kind of speak to the sensor aspect of it, temperature data is not something that is among the key data elements in 204, but temperature data is, as Don pointed out, is, a component of other food safety regulations. I think there can still be, as we are seeing more opportunities to use Internet of Things devices and remote sensing, or not remote sensing, on remote sensors in order to capture information, we're going to find that there's going to need to have further refinement of standards regarding the usage of that digital information for making business decisions surrounding specific food types. So a temperature reading for leafy greens is going to have a different impact, and like the duration and the way that it looks over the arc of a supply chain event is going to look different, and have different considerations versus raw chicken, for instance. So those are, you know, exciting developments, I think, that we're going to continue to explore on how do we digitize this, you know, very important information and have it in a way that we can incorporate it in analytical processes and make, you know, automated decisions.
Yes, and I also want to clarify one point that I made earlier, which is we have outlined as best practice for food to have the GTAN, the data, and the lot in data carriers, but for FSMA 204 specifically, the data is not a requirement. So that is for now in the proposed rule, it just specifies the traceability lot and the product identifier, the unique identifier.
So another question we have is FSMA 204 the answer to current traceability problems?
I would say it's a great start. Because it actually helps drive focus and it helps prioritize our efforts. Like Thomas was sharing, you know, it's better to start with a smaller group of items than just do everything. But at the same time, you know, just like Don was saying, we are doing traceability for the right reasons, right? It's for customer safety. It's for brand protection. It's for, you know, just ensuring that we build trust with our food throughout the system. So, you know, it is a start, but I think the vision for many of you out there and many companies is to expand it. I don't know what other thoughts you guys have.
Yeah, I would say that while it certainly can kind of motivate, or maybe maybe not force, but just you know, guide folks to start doing the right thing. I think that they need to realize that it's not going to solve it, because that alone isn't necessarily going to inspire a brand or inspire, you know, stakeholders to want to make sure that they are, you know, using traceability, or whether it's for reduction of food waste or expedited recall to, you know, to do that in a timely fashion. So I think that, you know, the legislation tends to come out sometimes very slowly. So I think that waiting until something is law or a rule is going to take some time. So I think it's very dependent on, you know, making sure if you're going to solve traceability, that it is on a timeline that fits your company's, you know, need to really assist with these pieces of traceability for, you know, reducing waste and recall and food safety, and just understanding where the provenance of food is from.
Yeah, I think I would add that, you know, you look at why did someone pick these particular ones? Why did FDA pick these? Well, these are the ones that recall the most, you know, leafy green, that just kind of makes it kind of the easier. So I think for supply chain, I mean, if you're dealing with leafy greens and that's all you do all day, that's easy, okay? It's when you're the distributor that has 25,000 SKUs, you know, that's in your warehouse. You know, I've got to collect data for this and keep in a repository for this. And so how do you, I think the really answer is, how do you automate this that Thomas was talking about earlier? How do you automate so I don't have people doing this, that I can actually just flow through my facility and I'm capturing that data, then sending that over there. And eventually, I mean, we're going to have to do this for everything eventually. And this is setting us up for it. But, you know, it's that last mile distributor that, you know, has to break that case down. And the rule doesn't really, and I'll just mention this, doesn't really talk about case level. They really talk about lot level in the 204 rule. But when you look at a distributor that has to put one case of tomatoes, which is one of the ones that's going to be, you basically have to trace that at that point. You have to give that a license plate to say, I sent it over here. So although we're not regulating to that extent, I think we're going to have to be able to track and trace this.
And one other thing I'd add is like, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to solve everything, but it is a great facilitator. I think there's certain things that are super beneficial about the proposed rule, especially getting key data elements and critical tracking events, just those core system design concepts like ubiquitously known that every single stakeholder in the food supply chain system that touches on these food traceability list items have to know and have to consider. And then it also allows us to point to specific standards on on meeting those KDE and CTE expectations. One other benefit that I see of it is that I think that it is going to produce some harmonization on the approach of traceability globally. You know, the food supply chain system is the global system, and it creates really a way to start regulating this across other national jurisdictions as well. So, and a way to consider this information. So I think it is a great enabler and facilitator, and it can allow the industry to move in a united fashion.
Great, thank you, Thomas. And so before we go, we have about 3 minutes left. I know I'm asking a lot of you guys, but if each of you want to just really quickly answer our last question, which is what, in your opinion, is the biggest challenge to implementing traceability? And as you do that, I'm also going to put up our panelist contact information. So Don, if you want to start.
Yeah, I would just say that standardization, doing the same thing, that we're all, getting on the same page. Any industry has a common language. And if we don't speak the same language, it's very difficult. I think, that's where GS1 comes into a big focus here.
I can chime in. One of the things that companies try to do, because they do need to invest, and at the beginning it seems like a big investment. And I say it seems because it's really hard to measure return on investment when you haven't implemented the programs. And then the training, right? To be able to find what is it costing me not to do this, or not to have visibility in my supply chain, or to have bad data. People have a lot of challenges measuring that, but good news is there's a lot of case studies out there of people that have actually measured that and understood after implementing, unique identifiers, global data synchronization network for product master data, when they have established data carriers and understand where the product is moving, how many other many benefits can come out of that, and how many savings they can just quantify based on that. It's just really challenging to do it before the investment, but it is there, and you can go ahead and access those resources at gs1us.org.
And then oh, sorry, go ahead, Amy.
Go ahead. Okay. I'd say my comment would just be, don't be paralyzed by perfection. That don't figure out how, do we need to start at the seed, or where do we start? Where do we start putting in traceability? Just start somewhere. I think then from there you can grow, whether it's further back and forward in your organization on, when you build on the standards and the processes, it is to just start somewhere. So if you're working with other partners, whether it's someone in food service or distribution and logistics or processors, to kind of pick where you're going to start and let it start to bloom or grow from there, and include those other stakeholders in your organization so they understand what you're really trying to accomplish.
And the one last thing I'll say is that, because I think my first, second, and third picks are already been taken, but there is still needs to be some work on the ability for us to translate business requirements and standards that really relate to physical processes and ensure that they can be uptaken in IT and development processes as well. So like the ability for us to be able to port those to a best practice and like terms and concepts that are familiar in the development community and the development industry can only help better and foster innovative software products to meet the many stakeholders that need to participate in the end-to-end traceability system.
All right. Thanks everyone for your time and insights today. Thank you, Amy, for your insights and your moderation of this session. And we have AIM North America's contact up on the screen if you have any additional questions. I will once again be sending this recording out once it is available to all those who registered. So thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
you.
Thanks.